Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, TSMO Program Planning. My name is Neelu Parvinashtiani and I will be helping with facilitating today's webinar. So this webinar is being sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration in cooperation with the National Operations Center of Excellence, or NOCO. So if you don't know us already, I've shared a few resources and links that connects you with TSMO resources on NOCO website, our previous webinar recordings, and our Twitter and newsletter on the useful links box that you see right now on the top right side of your screen. So below that, there is the question discussion pod. So all the attendee phones are on the listen-only mode by default, but we do have that question discussion pod for any comments or questions that come from the attendees. We have dedicated some time at the end for the question and answer session. So each of those questions in the question discussion pod will be read out loud and will be directed to our presenters. If possible, please mention who you're asking that question from, so at the end it'll be easier to moderate those questions. And then, so below that question discussion pod, you see a download slides resources pod. You will have access to a PDF of all the slides from today, along with a few other resources like TSMO program plans and TSMO primer document in there. So this download pod is available now, and then again, at the end, during Q&A, we'll make this available to you. So that is all I had. So with that, I would like to hand it over to the moderators for today, Michael Grant and Daniel Stanislaw. Take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Neelu. This is Michael Grant from ICF, and today with Danielle Stanislas, we will serve as your moderators for today's session. I'm with ICF and have been providing support to the Federal Highway Administration on many of their TSMO program planning efforts, along with Danielle, who has experience working both in the public sector in California with Caltrans and other agencies, and has been together with me supporting a number of federal highway initiatives around outreach on TSMO program planning, including workshops. Today, I'll provide just a brief overview of our agenda and then introduce our speakers who will talk about their efforts in transportation system management operations program planning. First, today we will have Jim Hunt from the Federal Highway Administration provide a bit of context around what we mean by TSMO program planning. And then we have three speakers from three different state departments of transportation who will talk about some of the efforts in their agencies. We'll hear from agencies that have both just recently started to develop a TSMO program plan or have recently completed one, as well as agencies that have had a program plan in place for some time and are moving through implementation and additional iterations of that plan. So first I'll introduce and just provide brief backgrounds on the speakers that we have, and the bios for our speakers will also be available with the webinar website that will be made available by the National Operations Center of Excellence. So first, Jim Hunt is a transportation specialist in the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Operations, where he develops guidance and leads research. Actually, I'm going to move this ahead. Jim Hunt leads guidance and research on integrating transportation systems management and operations and emerging mobility solutions in planning, design, and organization business processes. He also leads projects and program activities related to active transportation and demand management, and previously served as the ITS operations engineer for Federal Highway Administration in the Pennsylvania and Virginia divisions. and worked as a consultant supporting the National ITS Architecture Program and several state and local ITS planning projects. Then we will hear from Chris Hillier from the Alabama Department of Transportation. He currently serves as the Assistant State Maintenance Engineer and State TSMO Administrator. He began working for the Alabama Highway Department in 1992 and previously served the department in various capacities at the project, district, division, and bureau levels. He was a charter board member of the Gulf Region Intelligent Transportation Society and currently serves on the Past President's Council. He also serves on the State Chapter Council of ITS America and AASHTO subcommittees for TSMO and Transportation Security and Emergency Management. We will then hear from Brian Carey, who has worked with the Minnesota Department of Transportation since 1999. His work with the department has included working in freeway operations, traffic analysis, and incident management. In his current position, he oversees the daily operations of the Regional Transportation Management Center, which includes the MinPass system, ramp metering, and the Freeway Operations Group. He also has oversight over the design and integration of new traffic management systems deployed for Mdot and was on the project team that developed Mdot's TSMO plan. And finally, we'll hear from Joey Sagel, who is the Director of Maryland Department of Transportation State Highway Administration's Office of Transportation Mobility and Operations. He has over 22 years of experience in transportation operations, and his office is home to the CHART, or Coordinated Highway Action Response Team program, and is also the Maryland DOT SHA's Operations Office, responsible for traffic incident management, intelligent transportation systems, connected and automated vehicle program, the statewide traffic operations center, 3 traffic operations centers, and the freeway service patrol program. So we're very much looking forward to the presentations from our speakers today. Before we get started, we did want to put up a polling question for our audience to get a sense of who is listening in on the webinar. The webinar will be recorded as well, but for those participating, please indicate first what type of organization you represent, and feel free to use the poll right now. Okay. Well, as we see, we have a number of participants from some state DOTs, it looks like metropolitan planning organizations, as well as consultant and other organizations. Hopefully this session today will be very helpful and valuable to all of you. While we'll hear from several state DOTs, TSMO program planning is an activity that involves states and metropolitan planning organizations, as well as local governments and other partners. So we're looking forward to hopefully sharing some valuable information with you. I think we also have one other polling question, just to get a sense of whether there are multiple people in the location that you're at. So here, if you could just indicate how many participants are at your site listening to the webinar, that would be helpful to us as well to know a bit about our audience. Okay, great. So it looks like most people are just listening on their own, but there are a few that have a couple of participants together listening to the session. Okay, well, thank you very much. And with that, I will just note that state DOTs and transportation agencies have various experiences with TSMO program planning. And we'll turn it over to Jim Hunt from Federal Highway Administration to provide a little bit more context.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. Thanks to you and Danielle, the ICF team, for your partnership with us here, and thanks for the Center of Excellence for allowing us the forum to talk about some great material, and especially thanks to our 3 state presenters who are really going to provide some good information and rich insights. So I'm going to just set the stage a little bit with kind of describing the rationale for TSMO program planning, starting off with what Congress intended by TSMO when they established the formal definition, because I think it helps illustrate kind of what we're trying to achieve with, or what program planning can help with. Talk a little bit about some of the trends that are driving the increased interest in TSMO, what some of the newer, I guess, emerging and more demanding expectations are on us, and then talk about, with those changes, just what does that mean in terms of paradigms. I think we're shifting from a situation where transportation agencies were largely focused on delivering projects, focused on expanding capacity and about the infrastructure, and moving more towards a mobility management philosophy. So I think that leads us into the motivations for TSMO program planning as well. So what is TSMO? So for those of us that have been working in TSMO for a while, we're pleased to see in the MAP 21 legislation a formal recognition of TSMO by Congress. And I'm not going to read the definition here, but I think some of the terms in here do provide important kind of markers for what we're trying to achieve and how TSMO introduces some kind of newer approaches in our planning and decision making. So we're interested in integrated strategies. We're looking at focusing on optimizing performance of the existing infrastructure, thinking about multimodal, thinking about cross-jurisdictional systems, thinking about projects, but also thinking about services. So we go beyond infrastructure and think about the activities that support overall mobility, and not just mobility, but as the definition says here, security, safety, and reliability. So it's more than just congestion management, but there's many other objectives that we're trying to achieve with TSMO. And then the second bullet is more or less kind of the newer focus, at least nationally and on our end and a lot of circles and across the country, is not just operating and managing the system, but how to do that in a more active and dynamic manner. And that's manifested in programs such as the Integrated Corridor Management activities or the Active Transportation Demand Management programs. And I seem to be, those were all underlined each advance of the slide there. Okay, so what is, in addition to kind of that context nationally, what's happening in terms of external forces that are also driving us more towards a interest in improving and TSMO? First of all, is increased reliance on information, technology, data sources, more IP-based infrastructure, more integration of mobility apps and traveler information services, greater demands from the customers and getting information, real-time information, predictive information, and integrated across services and modes, growing importance on measuring performance and accountability, the recognition that finances are limited, and how do we get the most bang for the buck, the most output for limited resources, and how to do that more quickly, and not wait around for the full funding to do a major capacity project, but what can we do in the interim to improve performance much more quickly to provide that benefit to our customers. So one of the other ways in which we think about TSMO and when we go out and talk to new champions is to focus on the fact that TSMO can influence travel demand. So it's not just about accommodating volumes, accommodating demand, but how can we influence demand, where it occurs, when it occurs, what routes, what modes, and how can we, through our technologies and through our programs, influence that? How can we anticipate and respond to planned and unplanned events like incidents, weather, work zones, special events? How can we provide travelers with information they need to make effective decisions, timely and multimodal information? So with all those as sort of backdrops for where we're headed here, we can think about the scope of TSMO, the trends and the activities and the availability of TSMO to influence activities or influence travel demands. That leads us to think about new paradigms and moving from a traditional transportation project delivery model, which had very discrete steps from planning, design, construction, operations, and maintenance, and that last stage was where operations and management, or TSMO, tended to live in the old model, in the historical model. So, what we saw there was we focused on operations after projects were completed, much more focused on and oriented towards maintenance activities. To the extent that we were interested or thinking about TSMO-related activities, they usually are centered around recurring congestion, and we're very reactive. And now we're thinking about not just considering operations at the tail end, but integrating it throughout the life cycle of a project, not just reacting, but trying to be proactive and predictive, and certainly through the sources of congestion, also targeting non-recurring congestion. Similarly, we historically have thought about operations and maintenance as more of a vehicle-centric focus, moving cars and trucks on the freeway or the highway system, measuring performance in terms of vehicular travel times and measures like level of service, and then deploying individual site-specific projects and strategies such as ITS. Well, the new kind of paradigm is that TSMO approach is more multimodal, shifting from moving people and cargo throughout the entire transportation system, measuring performance in terms of travel time reliability, person metrics, deploying integrated transportation strategies at the corridor system levels as well, and regional levels. So with all that as the kind of background to how TSMO introduces some interesting and exciting developments for us, that's kind of the genesis of the need for program planning. So we have conducted and supported many of the SHARP 2 organizing for reliability activities, including the SHARP 2, LO1, LO6 capability maturity model workshops. And TSMO program planning was, very prominent need that was identified, or gap that was identified by many states and regions across the country. And some of the things we've heard is that we need to take these attributes of TSMO and move the program from more of an ad hoc set of activities that were oftentimes very champion-driven, very much housed within a particular unit in the agency, traffic unit or a maintenance unit, very little interaction outside of that, very little mainstreaming into the overall business of the organization as a whole. And the problem with that is, one of the problems is that program probably had a hard time being sustained over time, wasn't integrated, wasn't mainstreamed. If those champions moved on, oftentimes the program had a setback, and it took some time to revamp that up. So that's what we're trying to kind of establish in place with TSMO program planning, to try and formalize TSMO, make it more of a sustained and recognized a program within the agencies. So we undertook the effort a couple of years ago to lay out the elements, kind of suggested elements for a TSMO program plan, some ideas on the rationale. A lot of times regions or states had bits and pieces of TSMO program planning, but maybe missed some some areas. So this is an attempt to assist folks in kind of more comprehensively defining their TSMO program. It was written for a broad audience, including state DOTs, which we'll hear from today, but also metropolitan planning organizations, local, regional operations organizations, including transit agencies, were all in mind. And at the time, we kind of drew upon some of the states that really seem to have been out front with TSMO program planning. Iowa and Florida are a couple that come to mind that were used as references and kind of models for how to generalize this for a national audience. So one helpful way of organizing TSMO program planning concepts is to kind of categorize the activities in one of three bins, if you will. There's a strategic level, a programmatic level, and a tactical level. And I think you'll see as we go through the state presentations, you'll see this fairly well mirrored as well. But perhaps, different terms might be used. Programmatic level might be called a business plan. Tactical level might be more in line with an implementation plan or a service layer plan from a state. But essentially, you have these three tiers of activity. The strategic level looks at defining the relationship of TSMO to agency, mission, and regional goals, and what benefits we're hoping to achieve. The programmatic level is surrounding addresses issues surrounding organizational structure, business processes, and the implementation of TSMO activities. And as you said, the tactical elements can be thought of as implementation activities, specific programs, services, and how those are prioritized by the agencies. A little bit more on those three levels and some of the key outgrowths that or questions that they help address that we talk about in the primer. So, for example, at the strategic level, we're defining the TSMO mission. We're making sure that it's connected not just within the traffic or the TSMO unit, but how it weaves into the other units of the agency. Programmatic level, we're focused on making sure that the TSMO program can be sustained and institutionalized over time, and you see some specific benefits or rationales in that area. And then at the tactical level, how do we support effective delivery of the program? So that's kind of the framework that I think you'll see manifested in different ways with our three presenters. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce or turn it over to our first presenter, Chris Hillier from Alabama, who, by the way, in preparing for this, practicing for this session, I learned can also be affectionately known as the TSMO guru. So, Chris, TSMO guru, turn it over to you.
Jim, thank you, but I think you've got me confused with Joey. But we'll run with it as fast as we can. So thank you for having me today. What we realized here is that we cannot always predict the future. The future is changing. Technology is rampantly advancing, but one thing we can do is project the past. And with that, excuse me just a second, I'm having a little bit of technical issue here. Some of these slides are empty. Anyway, we'll move on either way. So
maybe it's because of the animation. If you keep clicking next, see if your stuff comes up.
Well, it looks like the white background may be messing with it, but that's okay. I'll run on through. So in the past, we've had, like most states, we had regional ITS architectures, local master plans. Our project lettings were very isolated, not much of a business case. Our origins began with tunnel operations in Mobile on I-10 down along the Gulf Coast somewhere around 1970, and then grew to the Birmingham area with the CMAC program in the 1990s. Mobile then, later in the mid-90s, experienced what at that time was one of the worst fog-related crashes in the history of the United States, and I think it still may be running third at this point. I'm trying to get these slides matched up, but so this next one we're looking at continues to talk about our past. The hurricane seasons of 2004 and 2005 brought executive support to improve and expand our operations from Mobile to Montgomery and the onset of contraflow along I-65. This same period also brought end of life to those regional ITS architectures which had not been maintained properly or periodically. Our leadership at that time was not committed to funding new regional ITS architectures that would simply serve the, to quote, that would simply serve the same dust collecting purpose of their predecessors, unquote. Thus a plan was devised with cooperation of FHWA to develop a single statewide ITS architecture, and a subsequent strategic business plan to carry us forward. Each of these had minimal stakeholder participation, and we were struggling at that time with a lot of attrition, staff-wise and knowledge-wise. Okay, you've got the slides up now, so how do I advance?
Yeah, so just let me know to move forward, and I will do it for you.
All right, let's go. There we go. Thank you. So, circa late 2015, one-on-one meetings were scheduled with each of our region engineers and their immediate staff to make the business case for TSMO. The bullet points here identify most of the talking points that we addressed with them. As I mentioned, historically, a business case had not been made. Next slide, please. This included overcoming conventional resistance and outlining a path of process, technology, performance, and collaboration. We sold the need for a master plan that would succeed staff attrition and leave a blueprint for the future. We also identified the need for a regional champion to market and oversee the program. That champion needs resources, some of which report to other areas of the department and some that do not exist. Next slide, please. So organization of similar task functional areas is critical to achieving data-driven, performance-based objectives. The green positions outlined here are established. The orange positions are developmental or transitional at this point, region to region across the state. The programming section will hold the responsibility of planning, safety, and funding. The engineering section will hold responsibility of design, construction, maintenance, and traffic, while the operations section will oversee RTMCs, regional traffic operations programs, traffic incident management, and service patrol operations. The emerging technology section will hold the responsibility of connected autonomous vehicle, alternate fuel vehicles, and other related subjects primarily. And then finally, all of this runs off of some type of systems infrastructure. So the systems section will hold the responsibility for network communications, data collection, data analysis, data management, hardware, software design, deployment, testing, maintenance, and operations. Next slide, please. So within those vision and objectives meetings, which were conducted, as I mentioned, late 2015, early 16, afterwards, we are ripped off and duplicated a number of other states' programs to develop ours. One such program was Iowa, who had done some great work at that point in time, and we followed a lot of their path and process while developing our own program. There were a number of other states that were involved in our review. But to ensure sustainability long term, the regions needed a master deployment plan, and the state needed overarching guidance and policy to bind each of those regions and provide continuity. Each of these included multiple stakeholder-involved workshops to ensure its success. Next slide, please. So the statewide TSMO strategic plan is designed as an executive brief for Mdot, stakeholder, and elected leadership to quickly understand the value and the benefits associated with operating our transportation network. And I think a lot of this is building right off of the primer that Jim was discussing earlier, but all this work was going on pretty much in parallel with FHWA's work on developing the primer. Next slide, please. So the statewide TSMO program plan provides structure and process to ensure success and implementation. This document provides the necessary tools for developing a capital program. At the highest level, it will produce a map and estimate of quantitatively calculated priority projects, thus providing leadership assurance that we are addressing our highest priorities first and investing taxpayer resources with good stewardship. This is a similar approach taken with other capital programs within Mdot for paving, bridges, safety, etc. on an annual basis. Next slide, please. The third component of our statewide plan was the service layers, and the service layers illustrate that TSMO is not a new term for ITS, which was a misnomer amongst our leadership. Additionally, it identifies specific applications to improve customer service, and currently we are considering adding freight management as a 10th layer to this. Next slide, please. The region TSMO tactical plans take a data-driven approach to defining their need, utilizing legacy information on vehicle volumes, crashes, freight, and existing infrastructure. The plan then outlines strategies, priorities, and future deployment recommendations and provides high-level estimates of costs for each of those projects. Next slide, please. We rely heavily on the capability maturity model and the AASHTO guidance to improve the effectiveness of our TSMO program to benchmark, measure, and improve our program annually. CMM assessments are done in January each year at our TSMO roundtable meeting. Each region TSMO engineer is charged with a self-assessment of each service layer against each capability dimension for their respective region prior to the meeting. We then openly discuss their assessments, the pros and cons region to region, adjust the scoring based on the conversation, and finally determine what the statewide CMM score is collectively. Next slide, please. So that's kind of where we are, and where we're looking tomorrow is outlined here. But the capital program, which is a composite of those regional tactical plans, identifies 173 projects with an average cost per mile of $86,000. We are currently making the case to leadership for a 10-year program. Additionally, we are compiling a case for increased operation and maintenance funding to address our RTMC operations, our device maintenance, service patrol expansion, and active signal operations. A third initiative is to move away from lease lines for all Mdot systems and develop a 2,500-mile Mdot fiber network. As our program has matured, we are realizing increased interest from municipal, county, state, and academic partners to collaborate resources, data, hardware, software, etc. To truly advance TSMO, the champions have to invest 50% or more of their time marketing the program to internal and external decision makers. Sometimes it's just as simple as going by and having a Coke. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian Kerry with Minnesota DOT, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Well, Nilo, as we get the presentation moved ahead to Brian's, maybe this is Michael Grant, I'll just remind folks that if you have questions as the presenters are speaking, please go ahead and add a question into the question discussion pod box. We will have time at the end of the presentations to take questions for all of our presenters and have some panel discussion among the different state presenters and Jim as well.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Looks like we got the presentation up and going here. This is Brian Kerry with Minnesota DOT, and I'm the director of our Regional Transportation Management Center. And as part of the TSMO effort, I was on the project team, but I got to give a nod to Ray Starr, who would have normally been given this presentation but was unavailable today. But Ray was responsible for developing our TSMO plan, and he asked me to kind of give this presentation since I was kind of part of the core team that helped develop it. So give you a little background on what I'm going to talk about today. We'll talk a little bit about the TSMO motivation for Mdot, why we decided to develop this TSMO plan. Then I'll get into our TSMO program planning process, how we got to the point of developing the plan itself. I'll give a high-level summary of what the plan entailed, including our strategic and implementation and business plans, and then what our next steps are, both in terms of some of the new funding that we've gotten and then some of the hiring and reorganization that we're planning. So to start off with, why a TSMO program plan? I think like a lot of the other presentations said that TSMO was already kind of something we were doing. We just weren't maybe necessarily calling it that. So we wanted to kind of develop this plan and become more deliberate about what we were doing related to TSMO, making sure we were doing strategies that had the highest value and were most cost effective, make sure we were being consistent about deploying these strategies, that we weren't just doing them when we had time or extra funding, and also making sure that we were doing them statewide in all of our different districts and regions. We also wanted to make sure that we were being proactive, that we were anticipating issues, and that we were planning ahead of time rather than just being responsive to situations that were out there. So before TSMO was TSMO, before we got started on kind of this process, it started off probably in about 2014, 2015 or so, with a number of Mdot staff kind of representing different areas of both traffic operations and maintenance operations. I attended a regional workshop for the Midwest in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and there they completed the capability maturity framework that you've kind of heard a little bit about already. And that basically told us that really to get to the next level, we needed to have a TSMO plan. But we weren't quite ready yet, so we decided that we would do a statewide ITS plan first. So in some ways, almost doing one of those system layers before really developing the TSMO plan. But we started that in 2015, and that had essentially three approaches that were kind of identified as part of that ITS plan. Approach A was a fiscally constrained plan, basically saying that we wouldn't get any new additional funding, so we weren't expanding operations, we weren't expanding our systems. In fact, we were even having a difficult time maintaining what existed and maintaining life cycle with our devices that were deployed already. So that was kind of our worst case scenario. And then we had our next step was more of an asset management where we still weren't expanding, but at least we were able to keep up with our preservation needs. And then finally an optimization scenario where we were actually installing new devices and also expanding our operations within our regional transportation management center. So as we started, once we completed that statewide ITS plan, then we really started to kind of dig into what do we need to develop an actual TSMO program. So we had a part-time TSMO position, and I call it part-time because it was really an office director position that was overseeing our electrical services section, but she also spent probably maybe a third of her time looking at TSMO for Mdot and trying to set the foundation for developing this TSMO plan. We formed a leadership team, actually kind of spun it off of an existing leadership team related to ITS. Our deputy commissioner was already involved in ITS America, and we kind of had a standing meeting with her to kind of brief her on what was going on within our department, and then she could kind of bring things back that she was hearing from ITS America. So we expanded that group to include a lot of our other division directors as well as key managers throughout the department and with some of our districts as well. We had an analysis of all of our existing efforts and starting to call them TSMO and kind of putting them under that umbrella. And so then we hired an initial consultant to research some TSMO alternatives, determine what our direction should be. So she helped look at other state options like Iowa and Colorado and Ohio. I think were a few of the ones that we looked at, what they developed, and then trying to figure out, okay, from what we're seeing, which ones do we want to kind of duplicate here in Minnesota, and so determine our own direction and then develop a scope of work to essentially hire a consultant to actually develop the TSMO plan. So before we actually got into the TSMO plan, the ball was already starting to roll. We were starting to get more interest from upper management about these type of strategies, and so we were able to actually put in a funding request and got really the following funded before we even had a plan developed. So just in even talking about the plan, we were able to get some stuff accomplished. And so we hired a systems integrator to help with some of our ITS deployments in greater Minnesota outside the Twin Cities Metro. We expanded coverage of our RTMC to not only just be the Twin Cities Metro, but entire statewide operations. We added hours of operations. We purchased cellular probe data, which was actually ended up being the HERE data. We expanded our service patrol routes. We started developing a streaming video system so we can get that out on our 511 page, and we funded some various cavalry-related projects. So getting into our TSMO program plan, we had our strategic plan, our implementation plan, our business plan, very much like what Jim and Chris talked about, little variations on the names there. We developed that strategic plan to justify TSMO for Mdot and set those goals and objectives. Then we went into an implementation plan to recommend our strategies that we wanted to deploy, and then got into our business plan. And that's a little bit different order than what, like Jim was saying, where you probably do your business plan before your implementation plan. Part of the reason was some of the timing in that we knew we were going to have a new governor. We also knew that would come with new upper staff, new commissioner staff, and so we actually wanted to try to get our implementation plan done early so that when those new staff came on board, we would have some new strategies that we could kind of present to them and start getting them kind of interested in TSMO and helping to fund it. And then our ultimate goal was to complete it all by June of 2019, which we did accomplish this last summer. So to get into a little bit more detail on those, our strategic plan, as I said, kind of identified that background and justification. We set our goals for what we wanted to accomplish, and those were improving reliability, mobility, and efficiency was number one. Number two was increasing safety, and number three was carefully and responsibly managing our transportation operation assets. And so from those three goals, then we broke that down into the 16 different objectives. So the first slide are the objectives that are related to improving reliability, mobility, and efficiency, and I won't read these word for word, as you can kind of see them for yourselves, but really focusing on that reducing congestion, whether it's incident-related or weather-related, also looking really a lot at construction and maintenance activities and kind of delays that we were causing from those. And then as we get into the safety side of it, so goal number two, we had a handful of objectives related to safety, really looking at not only those kind of more standard crashes like intersection crashes, roadway departures, but also looking at incident management related safety aspects like keeping our responders safe, reducing those secondary crashes, and reducing weather-related crashes. And then lastly, our third goal was managing those transportation assets and really breaking that down into making sure that we can fund life cycle costs of our operating and maintenance assets so that we could keep up with replacing our changeable message signs as they got older, our network equipment as it got older. So really kind of some of those things that came out of the statewide ITS plan that said, we need additional funding just to keep our existing systems alive, let alone expand. And really looking at how we manage the data, how we come up with better performance measures, what new data we need, and that's what really kind of sparked us purchasing the HERE data for statewide data because we didn't really have good instrumentation outside the Twin Cities metro area. So our implementation plan, we did a lot of outreach to our districts and offices to get some input. Our TSMO plan and overall was probably pretty centrally focused in terms of just looking at Mdot. We did have some brief conversations with our state patrol and with some of the transit agencies in our MPO, but we really wanted to try to get it in the culture of Mdot before we did a whole lot of outreach outside of Mdot. So that probably is a next step for us as we kind of move forward with our TSMO plan. But within the implementation plan process, we really wanted to go out to the districts and offices, really show the strategic plan as to the why, and then start to develop that what with their input and their buy-in, and develop the scoring criteria so that we could kind of prioritize our strategies because we came up with a long list of 34 different strategies. And the next few slides kind of go through some of those strategies. They're related to signal operations, to traffic incident management, to regular traffic operations, to work zones, maintenance operations, et cetera. So I click through these kind of quick to keep up with time and let you kind of skim through them here. So then our last piece of the puzzle then was our business plan. So we went back and kind of looked at, okay, what are our programmatic objectives that we wanted to achieve, try to identify, what kind of funding levels we wanted, what kind of staffing we wanted, how we were going to administer this in the overall organization. There wasn't a whole lot of appetite within Mdot at that time to really do a full reorganization to try to bundle all of our TSMO activities under one group. We kind of had that already a little bit with just our operations division. So there was a lot of discussion about how we would at least try to manage our TSMO program across several different offices and across several different districts. And I'll kind of get into here in a little bit as to where we're headed with that. Look at what kind of data we needed, what kind of business processes needed to be changed, and then we got into those 8 different recommendations. So our recommendations were to fully fund TSMO, basically meaning fully fund the 33 strategies that we had developed. And we knew that was being maybe a little bit ambitious, but that was what we put forward as our ask. We wanted to designate and fund a state TSMO coordinator, so somebody that was really kind of in a neutral position is what we were trying to decide. They would be within our operations division, but they really wouldn't oversee either our traffic operations or our maintenance operations side. Those were still kind of part of separate offices. But to help try to promote the benefits of TSMO and try to be that that connection between these different groups and making sure there was a lot of coordination across the agency. Then looking at creating staffing positions to support those TSMO strategies, continue and clarify the TSMO leadership team. We had that leadership team I mentioned before, kind of get a better definition of what their purpose was, as well as maybe expanding it to other groups, not only within Mdot, but outside of Mdot. And then expand on our working team as well. Our working team was fairly small, so we wanted to make sure that that group continues, but then becomes maybe more focused and a little bit broader into different areas as well. And then look at our organizational model, develop different performance measures and what data that we would need to accomplish those performance measures, and then institutionalize the TSMO implementation process. So if you focus more on the blue box there to the right, this was our TSMO funding scenario. As I said before, if we asked for funding all 34 strategies, we came up with a ballpark figure of about $16.5 million. We knew that was being pretty ambitious, so we came up with a $3 million scenario, just showing what we could accomplish within those 34 strategies if that was all we were given. And then we also kind of showed the scenario of no additional funding, which kind of started to show more of that inability to keep up with our asset management, maybe actually having some reduction of service in some of our areas. And so when we ended up getting, it was greater than zero, but it was less than the $3 million. We ended up getting $700,000 as an annual base, but we did get an additional kind of one-time in fiscal 20 for another $700,000. And so that allowed us to get kind of some seed money to start implementing our plan and doing a few of our strategies. And so we've got some strategies related to some signal timing, purchasing the Hillier data. So we had purchased it before as a one-year pilot. Now we've got the funding to be able to continue maintaining that data outside the one-year pilot, expanding our traffic incident management program, hiring a traffic incident management coordinator position, a position that we used to have but kind of lost due to attrition, so it was good to get that position back. And then connecting some of our signals in greater Minnesota to a central system that Metro had already developed, expanding that video streaming system, kind of the next step, phase 2. And then ultimately the biggest probably piece of it was hiring that TSMO coordinator that I've talked about, actually getting that position on board, which is actually going through the hiring process right now with the hopes of having them hired and identified by sometime in January. So kind of wrapping up here, here's our coordinator position, some of the roles and responsibilities that they'll have, really overseeing this whole implementation plan and working with the districts and the different partners as we move forward. Formalizing our leadership team, coming up with a charter as to what their responsibilities are, and then developing that working team with also some potential task force that may be focused on specific topics, maybe getting to those different layers, and developing kind of sub-plans related to those. And so this was kind of our core project team. You can see myself and a couple of the other players, Ray Starr really being kind of the lead in the effort. And that's a summary of our Mdot plan. So I'll pass it on to Joey Sagel with Maryland DOT.
Hey, thanks very much, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. I know we got a lot of dear friends and colleagues here on the webinar with us today. And Chris, and our friends in the, I'm sorry about that. Technical difficulty, and our friends on the call here today, you're going to hear some common themes, but what I want to focus on is how we got from here to there and focusing on how to take a good program and make it great. You've heard some of my colleagues mention on the webinar today that, we were already doing some of this stuff before it was called TSMO, and in Chris and I use an awful lot the R&D standpoint of not research and development, but rip off and duplicate. Share with each other and share with our colleagues with what's going on. Maryland has some unique challenges. It's America in a miniature, the way we look at it every single day. While it's only 42nd in size, it's 19th in population and 6th in density, and we have a very diverse geographic and socioeconomic demographic within our state. So real quickly here, when you take a look about the Mdot State Highway Administration, we have 17,000 lane miles and over 2,500 structures
that 17,000 lane miles only represents 17% of Maryland's total roadway network, but we carry 66% of Maryland's traffic volume. And with freight movement and the economy of a significant importance, system efficiencies driving us both publicly as well as internally, performance management and making a data justification and looking and analyzing our data, because what gets measured gets performed. That's why we have a huge emphasis on TSMO in Maryland DOT State Highway. So current trends, our VMT is at an all-time high. We certainly struggle being one of the nation's second highest commute times within our Baltimore-Washington area, as well as some of the most congested regions in the United States. And we all know from those oversaturated conditions lead to higher unreliability of our systems, which is needing us to focus more on what we're doing and how to improve it in TSMO, bringing it together. System efficiencies and reliability key drivers are helping with that freight movement and the economy driving it, communicating our performance, customer-focused and outcome-oriented goals within our programming and planning for our TSMO plan. And we have the highest level of support from the Mdot State Highway Administrator that's being able to help drive these goals. And Secretary Pete Ron has had for the last 4 years the accelerator performance measures internally that are helping us take a look at those goals and objectives there. And things like MAP 21, Fast Act, Managing for Results, and our own attainment report within our department are supporting our need for a formal TSMO program. The strategies you've heard from my other colleagues, these won't seem too out of sort from what was already shared from Alabama and Minnesota. We have some of the same things there, and some of the new stuff that's going on in Maryland is active traffic management, ramp metering, and some integrated corridor management focus. Those are some of the freshest things that we're focusing on right now in Maryland. So let's talk about how we got from here, or there to here, where we are today. Thanks to Jim Hunt and our Federal Highway colleagues on the call, thanks to the Sharp 2 LO1, not LO1, that's a previous lifetime of mine, LO6, TSMO funds. We had a CMM workshop in 2014. We ended up having implementation plan meetings. We put together a committee over 2015 to 16 in a cross-discipline and cross-cutting stakeholders, including our Institute of Higher Education partners helping us with that and the consultant community. And what we ended up getting in the end of 2016 was officially a TSMO plan. And we were still using the AND then. Now we've streamlined it. I'll get to that in a second. But that's what we ended up calling version 1.0. And it really did help us guide from where we were heading in the past. Let's see here. Oops, I jumped slides. Sorry about the technical difficulties. There we go. So fast forward to 2018, TSMO 2.0. 2 years. We didn't even fully have our propped up TSMO executive committee. We hired our TSMO program manager as a deputy director level within our organization in 2018. We basically were doing what we did, and it was so exciting to see how much that we accomplished organically just having the plan with strategic goals and tactical objectives that we carried out. But then it started rapidly evolving, so we needed to assess quickly where we came from in our 2016 plan and refine it from 2016 into 2018. So we're now operating in TSMO 2.0. Our goals are the 4 here: business processes, collaboration, systems and technology, data analysis and performance management, and our customer experience and engagement. That goal 4 very much ties into our administrator, Doug Slater's overall goals for his 4 goals for our organization. And I think that that's very important, that whatever plan you're starting to develop within your agencies, they tie in at the CEO level with goals and objectives here. And I, of course, won't read down through these, but I hope the slides will be available that we can download them from the pod and take a closer look at some of our objectives and our strategies here. And what we wanted to do was refine what we'd had in our original plan and start to help us carry some of these things out, especially as we've gotten into cooperative and automated transportation systems. We've gotten more into integrated corridor management. We've gotten more into our ATM processes within Maryland, and this has really been a great structure for helping us guide those, which has turned in, I'll get to turning into task forces in just a second, but our ongoing initiatives you see here that are helping tie in with our capital improvements, our ADA improvements, pedestrians and bicycles, as well as freight as well. That's certainly very important for us, and a large effort focused on our signals and multimodal strategies that include smart signal corridors and really taking our signal systems in Maryland and ramping those up. No pun intended, as we're also ending and ramp metering as well too. We're continuing to build on the successful programs and the grassroots of what started our CHART program and early on real-world applications of TSMO with our incident management and traveler information systems. We're constantly refining those and adding to them as needed. As I mentioned, when we created a TSMO program manager in 2017 into 18, fully on board in 2018, we decided that that would be a deputy director within our organizational structure. We'd had a lot of success through the last 25 years of having our CHART board, an executive board chaired by our chief engineer, deputy administrator for operations, and several key senior leaders, including myself, on there and hosted out of the Office of CHART and ITS Development. We had already had that business model in place, so it was easy for us to do that. So standing up the executive committee was easy. Coming up with a working group of task force leads, that was a little challenging. We had to put our thinking caps on, but what was super exciting is if you get the right people, not a lot of people, and we focused on the tactical examples that you see there on business policies, data analytics, training and educations, comms and outreach, systems and technology, and everything in the cooperative automated transportation EV/CAV field. And we got the right people in our organization, and when we reached out, rank, title, grade, and where you were on the food chain really didn't matter. We crowdsourced through the senior managers those that were interested in participating, and with that, it was seeing the synergy and see the excitement and see the involvement of folks. We spent an entire year with task forces reporting out to our TSMO program manager through our working group and our executive committee, and we're continuing to advance the state of the practice within the goals and objectives that we've set. The executive committee is represented by our operations office, of course, with my areas I oversee, our Office of Traffic and Safety, preliminary planning and engineering, construction, maintenance, policy and research, highway development, and our 7 engineering districts in Maryland are also included, but we have 2 district engineers at large currently from our metropolitan areas on our TSMO executive committee, as well as multimodal. It's very important having our business units here in Mdot of the Mass Transit, Maryland Transit Administration, and the Aviation Administration. The toll facility is also included in these things. So I mentioned a little bit about the working group and the task forces, and these are taking those specific actions and deliverables and resources and reporting out on those, and we're coordinating implementation of those actions and projects at the operations level through those groups. So TSMO awareness, outreach, and education, it's super exciting for us. We've put a lot of hard work into that, and the team and our TSMO program manager and all of our support staff that are helping do that. We're rebranding and revamping what it is we're doing, and thanks to the National Operations Center of Excellence for some recent awards that have gone out. We're a runner-up, particularly in this category. So we'd like to certainly be able to share what we're doing, and it starts really not just externally with our website and internet page and videos and story maps, but internally within our agency. This was a hard lift by my deputy director, TSMO program manager, Subrat Mahapatra, and I. We took a road show. Him and I personally went out, and that's sometimes what we felt it was important to take and not delegate, to all of our 7 engineering districts with our chief engineer for operations to talk about TSMO, to see how TSMO can go into ranking and prioritizing projects within their districts. That happened over a 6 to 9 month period. Executive mid-level manager meetings, 2 to 4 hour town hall meetings in districts and within maintenance shops around our state for presentations, questions, discussions, and answers, and catered presentations, not just one, but it was important for us to understand what audience we were talking to and see what the questions they may have had, as well as internally educating and informing. We continue to develop a basic level TSMO 101 agency. wide for our frontline feet on the street men and women representing the front lines of construction, maintenance, and design within our agency. And those other acronyms are internal education programs within Mdot, like many of your departments and your companies may have. And we thought it was important with taking a look at any of those entry-level graduate engineers and as well as leadership development programs, and finding all other opportunities with our MPOs and Federal Highway Department. We're continuing to use data and technology in our mobility realm. See some screenshots there from RITIS, the Regional Integrated Traffic Information System. That's a big part of Maryland DOT SHA's operations, from taking a look at real-time what's going on, as well as our chart advanced traffic management software that we use in our operation centers. But having RITIS up allows us to take a look at those dashboards, to take a look at archive data applications, to start taking a look at costs, and start seeing a look at impact. And again, I've mentioned before, big believer in what gets measured gets performed. And as we start to tie all this together, this is really helping pave the way for us into the connected and automated future, the digital layer of everything, the data being the new asphalt of the future, and tying in our connected autonomous vehicles, our freight, our weather, our maintenance activities, our incident management, and our transit efforts, all into TSMO. And those, again, fall into operations planning, performance measures, and communications. So I think that'll kind of wrap us up for my portion of it today, and I thank everybody very much, and I'd like to turn it over to Michael.
Okay. Thank you, Joey. Again, I'd like to first express my appreciation to the speakers we have today. We've heard a lot of great information about activities in relation to TSMO program planning and the benefits that that can achieve for states and for system performance. And for Jim in providing some broad overview about why this is a good practice for states, for metropolitan planning organizations, transit agencies, and other organizations to undertake a TSMO program plan. We brought together this panel of speakers really today in order to provide some highlights of different experience with TSMO program planning, and hopefully that's of value to you as the listeners. We've had, as you've seen, both two states with Alabama and Minnesota who've recently completed TSMO program plans and can provide some perspectives on that, as well as which Joey spoke about in Maryland, really getting to their version 2.0 of their TSMO plan as they've evolved and adapted over time and seen the benefit of this. So what we want to do actually is open up to questions from our audience. But before we do that, we do have a polling question for you as our participants to answer and to consider. Based on the presentations and the typical elements that were discussed today that comprise TSMO program plans, we wanted to get a sense of how you would describe the status of TSMO program planning in your organization, whether your organization already has a TSMO program plan in place, is in the process of developing one, or maybe you have other types of ITS or plans in place where that might be a foundation for a program plan, or maybe at this time are not necessarily looking at a program plan. But we've seen a lot of different organizations at different areas of interest, with some who've experienced and benefited from these plans and others that are still considering them. So we hope that you can learn from our presenters and ask some questions today about that. I'm seeing, based on the responses so far, there's kind of a mix of participants, with some with program plans in place and others that are working on them right now and others that may be considering them. So as you continue to do the poll, we'll at the very end of the session also provide some additional resources. Jim Hunt from Federal Highway Administration will mention a few additional resources, including some technical assistance opportunities with workshops that can be brought to individual states or regions as well, that may be of interest to those of you who are considering or potentially would like to build on existing plans to develop a TSMO program plan. So with that, I thank you for your responses. I'll turn it over to Danielle to maybe get started with our speakers and asking some questions, and then we'd like to take some questions from the audience as well.
Thanks, Michael. So I put a question in the chat box, but I see that multiple people are typing right now. So just to kind of get us started, the question that we posed is, what is the biggest challenge that you all have faced in institutionalizing TSMO in your organization? So I'd like to hand it to each of the three presenters, but I'll start with Chris from Alabama to give us your thoughts on that.
Culture. That's the number one thing. In Alabama, the DOT has always been a design, build, and maintain roads and bridges organization, and the thought of operating these outside of some special major events such as hurricanes, snow and ice, things of that nature, has never really been considered. So it's culture and being able to make the business case as to why we need to be doing this.
All right, great, thank you. Brian, thoughts that you have on this?
Pretty similar response. Certainly changing that culture. A lot of questions about, where's that funding going to come from? What interchange project are we going to delay because we want to do these operational type things? All those type of aspects of trying to change what Mdot's focus is and how that impacts funding as well as resources.
Thanks, Brian. And Joey, same question for you.
Yeah, very similar to my colleagues. The one thing I'll add in is with culture is that with the relationships we have with some of our internal offices, they are imperfect at best sometimes, even the way we communicate internally. And I think that's important to understand that we're all out for the same mission, and we need to be working together collectively, and that truly is what TSMO is.
Okay, thanks, you guys. So I've seen some more questions get submitted in the chat box. So Charles submitted a question about including MPOs. So a question for you guys about how you've involved your partner agencies, MPOs, and if they weren't involved, what are your perspectives on including them in the future? So just to switch it up, Joey, I'll start with you first on that one.
Oh, thank you so much. And yes, MPOs were very involved. We have very strong relationships with our two major metropolitan areas, not all inclusive of every MPO, but our Baltimore Metropolitan Council as well as our Washington Council of Governments for the National Capital Region. And we had them involved in the original development of our TSMO strategic plan, as well as our integrated corridor management and active traffic management plans that are there. Key stakeholder, and you're remiss if you don't include them. They really are a great partner.
Great insight there. Brian, your thoughts on this?
Our focus was a little bit more internal, really trying to change that Mdot culture, so we did not have them, as big of a part of the program as we probably should have. I think at that time we just had them part of some workshops and we did some outreach to them. But the strategic plan and developing the TSMO plan was really probably more internally focused.
Okay.
But certainly an area that we plan to expand to.
Great, thank you. And Chris?
Yeah, thank you. We have multiple, and when I say that, I mean a dozen or more combination of MPOs and RPOs in the state. Engagement with them was fairly easy. Their participation varied based on schedules and areas of the state and what they believe to be focal points, so forth. So to kind of echo Joey's statements from the previous question, we had to turn our attention internally to our primary staff that deal with MPOs and RPOs on a daily basis and make that business case to them and recruit their help to get MPO and RPO participation. We do have it. It's still varied, but I agree with my fellow presenters that it is very critical to what we're trying to achieve.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question that was posed in the chat box, Alejandro asked a question regarding what you all would consider to be the most important key component in terms of developing a TSMO program plan. Kind of what's the mover of TSMO that shouldn't be ignored, or if you guys even want to think about it from a lessons learned perspective and just share any thoughts you have on that. So Brian, I'll start with you.
I think definitely doing the outreach to all the different districts, making sure that you're getting their input and giving them the opportunity to discuss what's important to them. There was a lot of concern from the districts that this was just another thing coming out of central office, just another, number one priority type of thing. And so I think just making sure you have that buy-in from throughout the department.
Right. Joey, same question for you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. The CEO buy-in and support. We are blessed and fortunate in Maryland at the secretary and the administrator level that they're very supportive, and our particular administrator was director of planning and deputy administrator of that area of the agency as we were developing our plan. So planning for operations was near and dear to him, which ended up helping me dramatically. So my challenge is if to others, if you don't have that level of cooperation with your CEO, find an opportunity to tie these into whatever their core mission and values and customer service statements are so that they align with his or her goals and objectives, and you'll have a champion in no time.
That is some great advice. And Chris, last but not least, thoughts on this?
I would echo Brian and Joey, but I think I would say that, it's people. And by that, I mean it takes the right person. We've talked about champions, we've talked about focal points and making the business case, but we can all find a staff member to put in a new role or a staff member to put into a position that meets some predetermined qualification. But there's intangible characteristics about TSMO, especially when at a foundational level, when you're trying to get a program advanced and off the ground. There are intangible qualities that you've got to look for, and self-motivation, the passion, someone has a tie-in to some personal issue that this motivates them. It's not just simply bringing a designer or a project manager or, that level of employee over and saying, okay, now you're a TSMO guy. They have to have buy-in. They have to have motivation if they're going to go out and make a business case and try to get other people motivated and get that executive buy-in, if you will.
Great. Thank you. Okay, some other questions have come up in the discussion pod. Pat asked, how have you all integrated traditional safety program strategies and activities into TSMO? So with that, Brian, why don't you get us started on that?
Sure. It was identified as one of our goals of safety. As we got into the implementation plan, we probably focused more on some of the other operational strategies, mainly because we had the strategic highway safety plan, and so we didn't focus as much on some of the safety strategies as we probably could have. I mean, there's a few in there, and there's definitely some tie-in to some of the other operational strategies, but we kind of focus more on those type of other strategies related to more operational type improvements that definitely have a safety impact, but didn't get into some of the things that maybe overlap too much with our strategic highway safety plan.
Got it. Okay. Joey, what about you?
Very similar, especially with our strategic highway safety plan, and there were already a lot of key performance area goals and objectives within some internal state highway measures like our attainment report and our managing for results and the chart mission and goals and objectives. So it was really easy. I'm glad Pat asked that question because that's a very important tie-in, and that's why our traffic and safety office is so heavily involved in our TSMO implementation plan as well as our executive committee so that we can incorporate those. And if you take a deep autopsy down through some of our objectives and goals there, you'll see some of that safety sprinkled in there as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Chris, thoughts you have on integrating safety into TSMO?
I don't know that I can add anything more than Brian and Joey in that regard as far as the application and the things that we're doing. We still rely on our traffic safety office to help with many strategies, but from an operations focus and actually from a programming focus, the use of that data, the use of the crash volumes, the fatalities, the injury data, if you will, to begin to isolate and focus in on these hot spots, to look at areas of improvement. What service layer applications can we do? How do we work in conjunction with our traffic safety office? It's critical, and that's part of that business model again that goes back and makes the case to leadership that we're being good stewards of the dollars we're requesting from them on an annual basis.
Right. Okay, another question that came in the chat box from Greg. He asked, how successful have you each been that in integrating TSMO early on in the project phases, so early on in the life cycle of a transportation project? And we'd be curious to hear about if you've embarked on any process change as a result of integrating that. So with that, Joey, would you like to go first?
I would, thank you. And sorry, Chris, if I'm taking anything that's been a lesson learned in some of your best practices in Alabama. One of the things that we continue to do is it's getting better. Because of the TSMO strategic plan since 2016 to 18 and now 2.0, 18 on, we've had some major traffic relief project focus in Maryland, and it's been exciting. And I share this, and I protect names because I'm a very transparent guy. I like to share what's going on. And we had some PD and E discussions for some major congestion relief and managed lanes projects. And honestly, it comes back to culture, and I go back to some of those imperfect relationships that are getting better. I can remember showing up in a discussion in design and development. We're like, why is the director of operations here? And I said, well, it's very important because we need to manage it once it's built, right? Why don't we, instead of following the process model that we had for decades and decades, let's have a more collaborative focus. And then we start calling it TSMO. And everyone had a different idea and opinion. They all knew what TSMO was. They could say that. They said that TSMO was important and important as part of their job. But taking some of those goals and objectives that we've had, I've now got 3 major mega projects in Maryland that are examples of how that's improving.
Thank you, Joey. Brian, same question for you. Thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I think a similar response. I think we've always been pretty successful in getting some of the operational strategies included in our project phases, very early on in the process, and everything from intelligent work zones during the project itself to what operational strategies we'll have in place after the project is completed. I think with our TSMO plan, that'll become more deliberate, probably more widespread across more projects and across more of the districts, whereas right now it's maybe a little bit more metro-focused. So I think there's still room for improvement there, but we have been able to be successful in the past, too.
Thank you. And Chris?
Well, Maryland and Minnesota are much more mature programs than Alabama. And yes, Joey, I said that. That doesn't necessarily make me immature. But we are maturing in that regard. We're still not where we need to be or obviously where we want to be, but the internal collaboration, especially on the design and construction side of the house, to begin to ensure that process and technology and appropriate use of technology and field hardware, even as things as simple as our traffic control plans and ensuring that we're not desensitizing motorists in work zones. So we're making some good strides there, but we're still trying to catch up with Minnesota and Maryland.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. Okay, we have another question in the chat box. Chad asks, for those states that are testing autonomous vehicles, are you anticipating how that AV may affect your transportation system in the future? And in doing so, are you currently implementing solutions within TSMO that are going to meet those anticipated needs? So Chris, we'll turn it back to you to start off this one.
Well, thank you. We're taking a huge focus here. Actually, I've just dedicated a new position within my office for an emerging technologies engineer, and I think we touched on some of that earlier on the service layers. But we're doing a lot of collaborative research, testing, field deployment, and work in conjunction with the state legislature, who has actually just formed a self-driving car joint committee there to validate the things that we have. In addition to that, we're working to partner with in-state automotive manufacturers, Hyundai, Honda, Mercedes, and Toyota Mazda, to begin building that state coalition, if you will, so that all the voices have heard with regards to legislative requirements, the infrastructure improvement needs, so forth and so on. So there's great strides being made there, and we're one of those states that still have not necessarily decided what our field deployment infrastructure is going to look like, but we are doing some piloting and modeling in Tuscaloosa in conjunction with the University of Alabama and the city of Tuscaloosa there.
Great. Okay, you guys got a lot of stuff going on. Brian, what about you for Minnesota?
Yeah, pretty similar. We have a new CAVX office, which was kind of reorganizing our ITS office that used to be part of our traffic engineering group, and kind of pulled them out as a separate entity and have them more focused on some of the CAV-related projects. We have a couple of strategies within the TSMO program that are directly tied to CAV, looking at work zone data. That one we've already started doing some work on the work zone data initiative, trying to look at how we can get better data from the field and then how we can disseminate that through our 511 system in kind of preparation for CAV technologies coming in the future. And then also just kind of preparing our systems for obtaining and using data from CAVs, doing some testing on a corridor with SPAT messages, also looking at how we could utilize that for some of our other applications, whether it's running travel times or ramp metering, et cetera. So we're starting to look at that as well.
Great. And Joey, thoughts for Maryland?
Thank you. Yeah, for Chad's question, one of the things that we're doing very similar to what other states are doing in efforts to either lead or keep up with the cool kids with TSMO implementation, also included for us in my area of responsibility, adding in our CATS, our Cooperative Automated Transportation Division, and our CAV program manager for our agency. Carol DeLion leads that for us within our agency, and we have another steering committee internal to the State Highway Administration with cross-cutted and multidiscipline stakeholders for our CAV working group, and that's chaired. What we felt was important with it being housed in operations was that it be chaired with planning as well and work with all of those stakeholders, and very happy with the business model in place for about 2 years. That's been working well for us, because what we're doing there is talking about what solutions, what's going on with those projects, and how they can tie together. I'll say to my dear friend Chris how he gave us kudos of being mature. One of the areas that we're still advancing to mature in is to in this area. We're doing SPAT. We're doing what we're calling our US1 technology corridor. That's a key arterial between 95 and 295 coming south of Baltimore, and focusing on some of the technologies and that data that's going to be coming back in pilots. And we're continuing to focus on that. We're not as advanced as we'd like to be. So we've got the processes in place for the solutions, but we're not currently heavily implementing at this time. We're in planning.
Great. Okay, well, we've got a minute left here or so, but there's one final question posed in the chat from Eric, and he's asking, to what extent for each of you has your TSMO approach followed some of the larger National Operations Center of Excellence resources or guidance versus that which you did to tailor your approach specifically to match your state's needs? So I'll start off with you, Brian.
Sure. Yes, we definitely utilizes the resources that were available. We also, hired a consultant to look at some of the other plans that were out there, and then kind of take all that information and really try to tailor it to match our needs after that point. But I mean, as you can kind of see, there's a lot of similarities in our plan compared to other plans. Even having the process of having a strategic plan, a business plan, and implementation plan, very similar to what like Jim was presenting in his initial presentation. So definitely trying to get as much information as possible early on whether it's from the National Center of Excellence, whether it's from Federal Highway, whether it's from your partnering states, and then just taking all those different approaches and then tailoring it to meet the needs that you have for your state.
Great. Joey, for you, thoughts?
Oh, yes, thank you very much. NOCO is a tremendous asset partner and a group and an effort with some synergy to gel knowledge transfer together. And that we joked around a few times about the duplicating from each other's best practices, and that's just how we advance. Transportation, operations, anything within this TSMO realm, it's just how we grow. And without knowledge transfer, we're just not really truly able to get together. I can call Chris or I can call someone up and say, hey, here's what I got going up. We've got our network. But for all of our stakeholders and all levels, especially within our private sector, within our local governments, and within others, having that approach has helped make our program better and will continue to strive to help make others better.
Thanks for that, Joey. And Chris, last but not least.
I don't know that I have anything to add. That was very eloquently presented by Brian and Joey.
Perfect. Okay. Well, with that, I will turn it back over to Jim. Thank you for all of you for posing the questions, and thank you to all of our speakers and presenters for your answers.
Great. Yes, thank you so much. What an excellent round of questions there and great insights. On that last question, I might just add that from a federal highway standpoint, when we go out and support states in developing TSMO program plans, it's kind of a combination of the two between using the resources and tailoring. So we'll walk through the standard outline, but we'll get into the specifics of where that particular state stands with respect to things like organizational structure, staffing, workforce needs, resource needs. So it certainly is a good framework to start, but then quite a bit of tailoring that goes into it. Okay, I just want to mention a couple of related websites here, and there's also just to mention, I don't see it up now, but Neela, maybe at the end, bring up the file in download pod, which has the presentations from today and a few other, I think each of the state's plans as well can be downloaded there. But here we're showing some of the Federal Highway and Operations Center of Excellence related links. So our planning and organizing for operations websites are the gateway for everything related to this and other planning related topics. Housed within that is a TSMO website. There you see the Center of Excellence. There's a link to the program planning primer. And lastly, I just wanted to highlight one of the newer products that came out a few months ago is a set of TSMO fact sheets, which are a foray into better telling the story, into how TSMO relates to, connects to, supports, can be coordinated with more traditional legacy functions within transportation agencies. So there was the one question from Pat on safety. There's a fact sheet on TSMO on safety, but also fact sheets that concern or that assist in describing some of the linkages between safety and design, construction, maintenance, asset management, and other areas. A total of 9 there. And then finally, I alluded to the workshop. So we're supporting states across the country. I think by our count, there's about 20 states we would consider that have TSMO program plans or are getting close to that level. But we have some capability to help and help advance TSMO program planning in your state. So you can contact me or you can contact the local FHWA division office and we can talk to you then. So with that, Neela, do I turn it back over to you to?
Sure. Thank you, Jim. I just wanted to mention again that this session was recorded, and that recording along with the slides and the resources that you can see now on the download slide pod will be shared on the NOCO's website on the on-demand learning section in the Knowledge Center. With that, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists, our moderators, and also all the attendees that were part of the webinar today. Thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.